Oh, hi, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me today with today's Q&A, where we're going to look at Lesson 8. And within that, we'll be looking at, gosh, what will we be looking at? We're looking at a plant system design and our local plant survey. So without further ado, let's just take a look at the Lesson 8 discussion board. And I will share my screen to do that. There we go. So yeah, lesson 8, we're getting right down to the wire here. Three more lessons to complete. And after all our site analysis, now we're looking at basically a local plant survey, which is pretty straightforward. We're looking at just 5 naturalized or native plants that are medicinal, what they're used for, a little bit about their historical usage, and some plant nurseries in your area and farms as well. So that's pretty straightforward. And you can see here on the rubric that that's just worth 4 points. So there's a lot more points here. There's 14 that we've allocated to the plant system design. So, you know, that obviously tells us that we are wanting to put most of our focus on that portion of the assignment. So if we take a peek at that, we get a good good description here as to what we're looking for. And really what we're, in a nutshell, what we're trying to do here is just take a section of our overall design, right? Our overall project site. We'll take one section of it, and we're really going to do a planting. Basically, we're doing a planting plan for that area. Here we call it a plant system design and that's probably a better term to use, because really what we're trying to do is consider, that whole space and how we can integrate a number of different types of plants so that they function really well together, and we get all these spin-offs of ecological benefit, aesthetic benefit, and whatever else one is after. Of course, ease of maintenance and things like that are also important. And, honestly, when we get to this point in any design, it's a lot of fun for myself when we're doing this professionally. And having spent many, many years really dialing into plants, it's a great part of the design. And really, I feel it's more the icing on the cake, because the water and the work we do with water and the work we do with access in our design sequence comes before this. And that really sets the tone for what we're able to do with plantings. So again, this is sort of icing on the cake, and it's a lot of fun. But with this exercise, there's a few things you want to keep in mind. So you want to have multiple species. So we don't want to see a planting plan that's just sort of a monocropped planting. It could have a number of different purposes. Could be a windbreak, could be a hedgerow, could be, a perennial garden, or an entry to your, a bed that's close to the entry of your residence or your project site residence. And there's this word here, plant guild, that is also something we want to focus on. So what do we mean by that? Well, the planting guild, as I'm sure you know, is something that we, whenever we're assembling plants, we want to try and ensure that they're all going to work well with one another. And there are some obvious examples of some plants that are tough to work around. You know, in this part of the world, an example might be Western red cedar. So it has a very aggressive surface root to it. And if you're trying to plant something beneath it, it can be a serious challenge. Walnuts are an example of that. So they have a very limited number of plants that will work well with them. But all in all, in my experience, most plants are going to work well together, providing that you have, selected them so that they're appropriate, to that area, to that part of your site. So if you put shade and sun lovers together, that's obviously gonna, one will do better than the other. Same with the moisture. This was something I learned quite early in my career. Combining plants with a variety of water needs can be really tricky. So if you have some moisture loving plants that are near some more xeriscape plants, even though they might look really nice together, they probably won't perform that well. One may, you're either going to tend to overwater or underwater for one of them. So in this exercise, we've kind of laid it out here that you want to choose at least 2 individual plants of similar structure. So it may be taller, say, fruit trees. In an urban setting, those might be dwarf fruit trees. But what I would suggest you really focus on is looking at those various layers within the landscape. So we want to look at that tree, shrub, herbaceous, ground cover, all the layers that we are going to be dealing with. And when I say tree layer, we could divide that up into canopy, into understory. There's many, many different layers just within that. But in most sites, certainly urban sites, we're not typically going to be putting in these huge canopy trees. But just having that tree, shrub, herbaceous layer, if nothing else, is going to really help diversify the planting ecologically. And we've seen some remarkable instances on project sites where, we've just wrapped up a project, which is a good example of this, which was mainly a big lawn area in the front of our client's home. And we put in a rain garden and some plantings within and around it. And within a few weeks, just the insect and bird activity there was quite amazing. And our client was remarking on how she had never even seen butterflies in her front garden, and all of a sudden, boom, they're there. So it does not take long, but it does take those varieties of layers to achieve that, in my opinion. A lot of plantings, primarily ornamental plantings in the area I live, often you'll see tree and shrub components and very little herbaceous or ground covers, right? And they're critical. So you want to try and look at all those different habitats, right? So that's just a little bit of a snapshot there. I can say, the tough part of this assignment, especially if you're just starting to dive into the plant world, is getting to know all these plants comfortably, right? So I went through an apprenticeship program with the Vancouver Park System, and it was exposed to a lot of different plant materials. This was many years ago. And it took me, I'd say about a decade full-time work to really get to know the variety of plants that I could work with. And, is still learning about new plants and learning about medicinals and edibles and how all of these things can be combined to make a nice aesthetic planting. But it does take time. So don't let that discourage you. If it seems tough, yeah, it will be at the beginning. It's just, and not only that, when you do something on paper, which is essentially what we're doing with the design process here, that's one thing. But if you go out and plant that, then it's going to take at least a year for you to see the feedback, for you to take a look at that planting next year and go, how does that look? Is that what I expected? How are things performing? And you make notes of, at least, if nothing else, mentally make note of those aspects and how you might change it the next time. I mean, personally, I'm always looking at things that, and I've done a lot of planting in my days, but I'm always looking at items that I've planted, whether that be a month later or a year later, and seeing how I could improve on it, right? So it's just how we get better, and it's not, I try not to be critical of myself, but just looking at ways that it could have been a better result. And every site's a little bit different. So it is a pretty involved process, and I don't expect at the end of this lesson you'd be completely comfortable and ready to go. But what I would encourage you to do is just move forward with the design and do try and execute some of that if you are able to, and really observe how it's going to respond. Now, one thing I will throw out there is in some projects, we've had to phase in plantings where we've done woody plantings first, and then we've come in later with herbaceous or ground cover plantings. And that can be quite challenging because, you're going to have part of the ground will not be occupied, right? So that's one of the upsides of all of these different layers as they complement each other, and you really end up controlling the ground. So if you're not able to put in, say, some herbaceous plants or ground cover plants right out of the gate, you'll find that you're going to have a little more maintenance in terms of weed generation and moisture loss, as well as your soil biology will be a little less active. So, but that can still be done. So it can always be augmented and improved. Let's see here what some of the things that, so important things to consider: the ecological service, right? That these primary species provide, the function within the community there, within that system, some of the yields, and for some plants, that may be an aesthetic yield, right? We certainly have some students that like to combine edible, medicinal with aesthetic. And there are some, for everybody, it's going to be slightly different, right? Their approach will be slightly different. And there's not a right or wrong there, but you certainly do want some form of yield. Why you've chosen the plant. And let's see how you'll ensure adequate space and effective management. And that's really good to consider. So I can tell you what we do with our planting plans is we will typically place tree and shrubs on the drawing, and we will show their symbol size, so how they are scaled and related, as if they are, sort of a 5 to 10 year level of maturity, somewhere in there. And then what we do, so by doing that, we're providing adequate space for all the woody, and we'll call that permanent plantings, so that we never have to worry about pruning if we don't want to. And there's not going to be any collision between those plants. And that's disappointing when that happens, if you've overplanted, and then you have to go in and make some changes. So what we do is we lay that out in a planting plan, and then we add all the other spaces that are left are going to be herbaceous or ground cover or climbers or some other layer that's less permanent. So with a lot of the herbaceous plants, we need to be considering division in time with those. So what is that? Well, often plants need to be split in order to keep their vitality up. And when you do that, you end up with a whole bunch of extra plant material, which is wonderful. So where I'm going with this is those clumps of herbaceous, and that's primarily what needs division. It's pretty hard to divide up ground covers, but the herbaceous elements, they are somewhat portable. So, we may plant up a garden that in 3 or 4 years, you've got to, when you come in to do any divisions on some of that plant material, we may be actually removing the odd item and not replacing it because these woody plants have started to fill some of those spaces. And that way we can, again, control the space or the ground. And that's a big part of lowering the maintenance, is in being very intentional with what's growing on every square inch of your garden. If you leave it sort of open and empty, you will have something happen there that's not part of that you are not planning. So, and that could be very interesting, and it can also just add to your workload, right? Yeah, some of the ways that we can plant. I try not to put things in lines, and you can either, do little groups of plants. You can do drifts of them. I should actually, maybe while we're chatting here, I will just bring up an example that I could show you with that. See if I can find one here. Okay. Yeah, sorry, I'm just looking here because sometimes what we do, which I find really helpful, is we will split up the planting into trees and shrubs. There we go. We can look at that one. There we go. Okay, so I will just switch our screen here. This is a little urban project that we did for some folks. So here is the planting plan of the whole garden that we were looking at. And I'll show these other elements. All right. So on the left here, we have, this is a large sheet. It's 24 by 36. That's typically what we use. But so on the left here, we have our planting plan, and we're showing trees and shrubs. So we're just showing woody plants, and all the other plants, herbaceous plants, and any ground covers or vines are grayed out. And that's, I like this because it really gives a good idea of what this framework's going to look like when we planted it up. Are we, especially in an urban environment where your privacy is always an issue, we're trying to screen out one neighbor or another. So I find this really helpful. And of course, the software we use makes that relatively easy. And then we do another viewport here where we show, in this case, the perennial plantings. So we do the opposite. We gray out all the woodies, and then we show where we're putting all those herbaceous plants and ground covers, right? And often, there'll be awkward spaces between shrubs and at the back, between, near a fence line. So, in this case, we're using sunchokes, nice, tall, herbaceous, narrow grower. So that's graphically how we depict that. And then here is just kind of an overall. So with what we do, we create a planting list as well. And that's the Latin common names, the quantity, now we say schedule size. So that's the pot size, and then a few comments here. And of course, scale and north arrow and all that stuff. And some people would notice that my north arrow is just off. It's not totally north up. However, in this case, it was best to tilt that a little bit. So that's one example. And this is basically that overall concept. So we can go from the concept and then really start looking at the details themselves. All right, so let's go back. And the reason I show you that is we're not tooting our own horn here by any means, but what I have found super helpful in my career is seeing what other people do. And in my early years, it was the people I was working with in the park systems, and you see what you really like, and you begin to incorporate that into your own work. So I had some mentors that I was really happy with some of the things they did, not all of those things. So you sort of cherry pick what works for you. So I would encourage you whenever possible to look at other people's work, and that could be the students in this class. I was really fortunate for a couple of years. I worked as a project manager and estimator for a commercial division of a landscape company close to where I live. And I got to see 5 or 6 landscape architects' drawings every week. So I got to see so much variety, and I didn't really get too inspired by their planting layouts, but I really dialed into how they were presenting their drawings, and that certainly helped me with my career. So that's and I'm probably getting, I think I'm in my 38th year. So, and I'm still learning stuff. So it never ends, which is wonderful. You don't want it to end. And there's always something new to learn. And I do not know it all, that is for certain. So plant system design, yeah, big part of this assignment. So again, there's some resources here on that tab. There's quite a few resources you can look through. This is an excellent database, Plants for a Future. I use that a lot when I'm looking at edible and medicinal plants. It's a great resource. And even if with some ornamentals, that I've worked with in the past. You go in there and it's surprising to read, value that these plants have outside of just their aesthetic value. And then, of course, we have the rubric. We've looked at that. I noticed that we did have one question, and I'm not sure who asked it. That doesn't matter. So the question is, a plant system designs focusing on a portion of the site and the accompanying statement of purpose and goals. Is that for the specific portion? Yes, absolutely. Do you have any favorite plants? You know, I have a lot of plants that I work with in my area, because where I work, deer pressure is huge. So most of the designs we're doing are deer resistant. And I never say deer proof, because I often get surprised by what deer will do in our landscape, and it's not always good. But you learn to work around them, and you know, I don't see them, they're not too hard to work around. When we do have an opportunity where the deer aren't present, wow, that really expands our planting palette. But do I have favorite plants? You know, I would say, here, I'll bring up an image here to answer that question. Just got to find it, which won't take me too long here. All right. Okay, well, we'll do that one. We'll just switch over here. So that is an ornamental landscape that we were involved with probably 20 years ago. It's quite frightening to think about that. And this was designed, and this is a year after installation, right? So if you set up things well in terms of soil and your aftercare, you get a tremendous response in growth. But if you were to ask me what my favorite plant is in this garden, I honestly couldn't tell you, because they're all favorites. And for me, it's how plants interact together. It's not the individual. So an example of that might be this plant right here. This is called Phlomis russelliana, and it is a beautiful plant. Now that probably is getting close to one of my favorite herbaceous plants, on the aesthetic end of it, right? But it looks twice as good when you have neighboring plants with it that complement it. So we have, you know, some white flowers, some blue, some asters here, this shrub with purple foliage. So, you know, I guess, yeah, it's not an easy thing to answer. I would say no, I don't really have favorites. I do have preferred groups that I like to work with. This plant back here, this white spiked plant, that's called Lysomachia ephemerin. And that is a very showy, upright, well-behaved herbaceous plant. But it doesn't look stunning unless it's with something else. So we have a bunch of tall ornamental grasses, and these actually double as stakes. So anything that gets a bit floppy, we plant sturdy items around it, and then they're holding it up. We don't have to go in and stake the garden, right? So we're mainly because we just come in and build. We're not here afterwards maintaining. So we want to set this up so it's as easy as possible. But the same thing with along the front here, we have some grasses that are beautiful. Stipa tenuissima, or Mexican feathergrass, I think it's called. And, you know, it looks great, but it looks way better when it has neighboring plants that complement each other. So hopefully that has answered that question. So yes, it's the groups I really enjoy, and those tend to be based on the setting and deer resistance. In this case, this was an organic farm, a couple hundred acres, and there was a 3 or 4 acre section that was really built as more of a park setting. It's quite amazing. Has this huge dry stone wall. It was quite a unique project that didn't realize at the time that it was basically a one of. I can't imagine another one like that. It was almost, it was during the .com days when people had more money than they could spend, and it's certainly not the case anymore. So yeah, there was a unique opportunity there. Let me just go back to where we were here, and we'll see. Yeah, so hopefully that helps answer that question. We can take a look at one of the examples here, one of the student examples that people are able to access in the modules section. And I won't bother going through the local plant survey. I mean, and honestly, when I give you feedback on that, it'll be quite brief, because as long as you're, providing what's been asked, that's wonderful. The main event is going to be in this section here. So the first sheet is really talking about existing conditions. That's really important to know what the current area looks like. So in this case, the student has just taken a screenshot of a portion of their project site. They have not included the whole thing. If we go back, there's their base plan, right? So they're just taking this section here. Now, you could enhance that a little bit. Oh, they have here, sorry. So this is a nice little touch. You do a small little viewport of the base plan and indicate where it is. And in this case, it's a proposed fig guild, and where it sits on the site, and then a picture of it, and then a statement of purpose. That's a really key part here. Why are you doing this? And a couple of the goals. What the goals are, what's the strategy to achieve that goal, and some of the elements that are involved with that. And then the plant system design itself, which is proposed. So I like this format in that we have existing material that's grayed out. That's really helpful. When these are grayed out and the new plantings have some color, then it's very easy to understand what's new, what isn't. When everything's colorized, it takes way more work for somebody that hasn't been working on the drawing to fully understand it. So that's one of the kind of benchmarks that I look at. And it's great with everybody's work here. If I can fully understand what's going on without talking to the designer, then they've done a great job graphically. So this is really easy to understand. There they have a plant legend that relates to this. I'm not super crazy about legends and how this has been done. This is a little bit hard for me to read, but it's completely acceptable doing this. No problem at all. We tend to do call outs, as I showed in a previous design, that we don't do legends, but either one is great. And you just want to, in this case, I really couldn't do too many labels because there's so much information being provided here, not just the planting itself. And then here's a little note about the guild, and then the cross-section view, which is always very interesting. In this case, there's a bit of a slope, and they were not retaining, they were changing the grade there a bit. So that's, that can be a very good idea. Also, that low sun angle at December 21st, where that is, and some of the plants, and the section line, that A and B line. Now, this is great, but there's no, there's an A here. So it is nice, if it was perfect, we'd have an A and B at the bottom, so we could tell which direction we were observing this cross section from. Are we on this side or are we on the other side? Right, so that's just a pretty minor little detail, but there's a scale, all the project info, so that's looking wonderful. So it's really a three, the design itself, we just want to see existing and what you're trying to do, the actual planting layout, how they interact, and then a cross section. And then we're going to go into this plant species matrix, where we take a look at that planting, and then we add the plants into their appropriate places within the spreadsheet. And you'll notice here, most of these plants actually are herbaceous, not shrubs. And this section is shrubs, but it's really acting as a subcanopy. And it might not have been very easy to edit this, but that is, that's the reality. So 3 distinct layers, boom, boom, boom. And it's as easy as that. If you can maintain that with most, if not all of your work, then you're going to have, an improved result. Sometimes you can't. I'll show you an image a little bit later on that one, or maybe I should right now. Sometimes you don't have space to do all that. I'm just going to quickly switch. Here we go. So here's a ring garden we just did. So this is only after, a week of planting. And things are ramping up pretty good. I'll show you what I mean though. I don't have a picture. This is during construction, of course, not looking as pretty, but this slope does not have trees or shrubs on it. It's strictly herbaceous, but we have really tall ornamental grasses, and then we have much shorter herbaceous. So we're still trying to play with that layer effect, but we were not able to do it here. So there are exceptions. All right, back to reality. And let's see here. So yes, that's just the sheet on the species matrix, and then the SWOT analysis. So that's a great exercise to go through. And that's basically going to conclude that section of the assignment. And then if you have any questions, and obviously this person had a few, that's an interesting one about figs. They are fairly aggressive. I've actually found we have a fig tree on our property that's at least 20 years since I planted it. And I have found fairly small roots 50 feet away, so they go searching. I would not say they're looking for moisture and nutrition, but personally, I would not say, they're easy to work around, and the items that are around it right now are annual cropping beds. So we broad fork those and take care of any roots that are within that top 14 inches. So even though they are aggressive, I don't think they would damage. I wouldn't put any trees near a septic tank. Place 7 meters away. Probably need to go a little further than that, but yeah, so that's a little overview of that assignment. Does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask about that, or no? It's all pretty clear. Yeah, it's a tricky assignment. Like this, I wouldn't say tricky. It's just there's a lot going on, and I guess the one thing that you can do is sort of overthink it, overanalyze it. And funny enough, when I go to do any planting plans, it's going to sound totally airy-fairy, but when I do them, I'm just really doing them by feel. It's how it feels on paper, and then if it's I've done this enough, I can make it work on paper and then translate it onto the site when we're planting. For years, that was not the case. I would say for 15 years of my career, I had to assemble plants I wanted to work with and then lay them out on the site. Even that huge project that we did on that organic farm, we would just purchase and bring in truckloads of material, and I would just lay it all out and make it happen in real time. There was very little planning, and that's super stressful because you have to perform. It was weeks and weeks of planting. So every day I had to be on it and feeling good. And it's very tiring. Whereas now I've done enough of this so that I can put a planting plan together, much like we're asking you here, and know that, it'll change a little bit when I go to plant it. But the reality is it's going to be pretty spot on, and I have a very good idea of cost, and that's the big deal here. With a planting plan, I can cost it out accurately. With the one we showed you previous, that's impossible to cost. It was just hourly, and that's not as pleasant for the client. They have no idea how long, how much. So it's good to work towards, as much planning as possible before you get to the site, for a number of reasons, that being one of them. So let me see here. I don't know if there's anything else. Is there anything anybody wants me to cover off other than that? Yeah, we're all good. I'm certainly happy to talk about other, what's coming up, but that's probably not a good idea to get too far ahead of ourselves. Okay. Well, if nobody has any questions, maybe we will wrap today's meeting up and look forward to seeing all of your work next Monday, if you're able to get it in for that day. And then we've got a couple more assignments and we're good.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you both for attending today and showing all your interests. So have a great rest of the week, and we look forward to seeing your work next Monday. So take care.